Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Edwards with Voices. Welcome to Expanding Your Reach Digital Advocacy. This is a part of our initiative, Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia, which was born to empower marginalized communities and acknowledgement of truth to promote healing, reconciliation, and justice. So this is an event hosted by that campaign. I use she, her pronouns. If you use a particular pronoun, feel free to put that pronoun next to your name. And again, welcome. So a little bit about Voices. If you're not familiar with us, we are Virginia's only multi-issue child advocacy organization. We specialize in the following areas, and also equity, early childhood education, family economic security, child welfare, including foster care and adoption, and some juvenile justice work, health and well-being, mental health, trauma-informed care, and equity, and we're privately funded. What does this mean to advocacy? It means that there's no conflict of interest when it comes to our advocacy initiatives. We're not advocating for more funding for the Virginia Department of Social Services, for example. And we're not directly impacted by that funding if we are advocating for funding. We're a nonprofit, which means we're also nonpartisan. We work with Republicans, Democrats, Independents. What does a nonprofit mean to advocacy? It also means that we can't necessarily endorse candidates or ask them to resign. Some organizations have been moving to C4s, but a little bit of background about how that relates to advocacy may be helpful as you work with other organizations. We're also home to the Kids Count Data Center, tracking trends and patterns as it relates to child well-being. Our research director's name is Lauren Snellings. If you're ever interested in contacting us for more data, we also offer community assessments as well. Here are some types of advocacy. Maybe your organization is engaged in some of these types. Maybe you have yourself engaged in some of these types, but we specialize in coalition building. In each of those issue areas that I showed previously, we have a network, a foster care, early childhood education, and then we also have the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia Coalition that you can also join. At the end of the year, around this time, you'll see us posting unified policy agendas, which ours will be posted this week in each of our issue areas. We're this year also offering equity impact statements. So we're leveraging our data center to look at how that policy impacts certain populations. We offer presentations like this to make sure that you go into advocacy confidently, but also to raise awareness on some of the issues or identify challenges and best practices. We serve as an expert resource, and you'll find that we also maintain a great social media presence. And then lastly, we prepare all year for now, which is lobbying during the General Assembly session. So the making of a law. It's important to know kind of how advocacy comes about. Sometimes it starts out with just an idea. And some examples of that could be derived from a tragedy like Sandy Hook, or if you're familiar with Senator Deed's story, his son Gus was experiencing a mental health crisis and needed an emergency placement and was unable to get that and eventually ended up committing suicide. So also, it can start off with you raising awareness to your public official and saying, I'm seeing this trend in our area. I've experienced an issue myself, and perhaps other people have as well. And then so that is how a bill begins. There are hundreds, actually thousands of bills introduced in the General Assembly session. You typically have a legislative champion on the Senate side and the House side. This year, unfortunately, which has brought some of you here today during COVID-19, the bills are limited. So you'll find that we don't have as many this year. And so we've had to really prioritize our advocacy to make sure the ones we feel are most important are introduced. Who can advocate? Well, here you see me. It's actually before I started working at Voices for Virginia's Children at a Foster Care and Kinship Advocacy Day, where I told my story at the General Assembly session as a kinship foster care alum. And so that is one an example of advocacy, which is advocating during our advocacy days. Another is providing testimony at a hearing. So if you're interested in a particular bill, what you would want to do is get that bill number or budget amendment number, and you can kind of track where that bill is heard and testify at a hearing. The best time to really build a relationship with your legislator is actually not during the General Assembly session. It's before, when they have a little more time to get to know you and engage. You can invite them to one of your programs or plan a town hall amongst other community members. And then what you'll really be learning today is how to advocate using social media. And so we'll dabble into that a bit later. And when I'm speaking to folks, sometimes they feel the need to really want to be heard at the local level because you see an immediate impact at the local level sometimes, or a more quicker impact. And so some examples of your local level public officials are your mayor, city council, board of supervisors. However, now is a great time to take advantage of state advocacy. And so that it would be your governor, your House of Delegates, and your Senate. And then at the federal level, which many organizations have been dabbling into a bit more in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, is taking advantage of the stimulus package funding. And then you can work at the state level to see how that's adopted. So at the federal level, that would be engaging with your president, House of Representatives, and Senate at the congressional level. To find this out, you can visit Google Find Your Legislator VA, and then you can get an idea of who your public officials at the state and congressional level are. At the local level, you may have to do some Google searches to see who your local representative is. So for your local advocacy, some key times to remember is that the budget is proposed in January, February, and then finalized in May. So now is a particular impactful time to reach out to them and let them know what you'd like to see in that budget, and then, or what you wouldn't like to see in the budget. And then flag May for those Board of Supervisors meetings or council member meetings. Most have budget hearings in March or April, and then you are also able to get involved in the planning initiatives. They're public meetings, they often post, so you can take advantage of those public meetings to make sure your voice is heard. Politics the Virginia way, well, it can be a little frustrating. It's to just remember that politics is very incremental. And so we often dip our toes more and more each year into a specific issue. And then over time, we see that great impact we were hoping for from the beginning. We do have a one-term governor. And one thing to note is that, for example, Governor Northam will be proposing his signature budget, and then that will be adopted by the following governor. So they're actually working their first year off of the previous budget of their predecessor. We also have a part-time legislature, typically 60 days in even years. This year we'll have a session between 30 to 45 days. It's actually voted on to make it a 45-day session. Every year is an election year in Virginia, and this comes with some pros and cons to keep in mind. One, we do typically have a greater turnout on the presidential year because people have a greater awareness about the presidential elections. And so that means some extra electoral advocacy on the off cycle. We also have a closely divided House and Senate. This comes with pros and cons, but the pros are that it forces Republicans, Democrats, Independents to all work together in order to have a bipartisan impact as it relates to policy. Now, this has changed a little in our previous election year. Virginia is a little more blue now, but generally our state is what I refer to as purple, a mixture of Republicans and Democrats that's very close. And then for federal advocacy, you can subscribe to your public officials listserv to be flagged at their town halls. You can also follow them on social media. A lot of them have Facebook and Twitter. You can connect to national networks, and then there's ongoing opportunities to make your voice heard when as it relates to the budget. A key example would have been for that stimulus package that was just passed. And there will also be another opportunity, most likely, when Biden comes into office. Now, in order to have to be strategic in your communications, whether digitally or in person, you have to develop your target demographic. And this picture you see here is actually a pretty powerful picture of some previous legislators that are no longer in office, and some still are in office. But this is what we call the Money Committee. There are two money committees, the Senate Finance and the House Appropriations, and they're the committees that really hold the purse strings. Because quite often, if there is a bill or that's proposed without a budget, the bill is not going to be impactful. And so these committee members vote on whether that budget will be adopted or whether it will die in the Money Committee. And so when we're developing, for example, a bill or a budget amendment, we know it's going to reach these committees. And so we typically may target those in our advocacy efforts. So in developing your target demographic, I encourage you to strategize, analyze, and mobilize. When the big goal seems out of reach, start with a series of wins to achieve the larger goal. And so you may want to engage in kind of a map of who's the powerful people that I need to target for my communications. If you have an idea that will likely, if it's related to labor, for example, you may target the Labor and Commerce Committee. If it's related to agriculture, you may target that committee. If you know it's going to have financial impact, research to individuals in that committee. And so that way you can target strategically. But then as it relates to the private industry, you may have organizations that can offer what I call apply some pressure or some additional clout. And so, for example, in the justice arena, you may want to connect with Brown Virginia, who serves as a coalition for all justice organizations. Or if you have a great passion for mental health, you may reach out to NAMI or Mental Health America. And then lastly, what you want to target is your people that aren't going to like your idea, your adversaries. And so with that being said, keep it in mind and see if there's an alternative approach that you can take to get their support. For example, when Voices did mental health advocacy and trauma-informed care advocacy following the Sandy Hook shootings, we didn't necessarily get involved in gun conversations, but we could connect with the trauma-informed schools conversations and the need for additional support personnel. So research your legislator's area of interest, especially your legislator that you are a constituent of. They have an incentive to listen to you because you vote for them or may choose not to vote for them. And so that offers an incentive. Research their committee assignments, their profession. For example, if they're a lawyer or a doctor, they may innately be interested in issues related to that. Always state the purpose of your outreach, the problem, the solution, and then connect it to a call to action digitally. So whenever you post something or whenever you reach out to your public officials digitally, think of that, what's your purpose, and then what's your end goal in mind. And then of course you want to do this in Twitter handle way, so under a certain amount of characters to make it social media friendly. If advocating for a particular bill or budget, think of the journey. So it may go through, like I said, the Agriculture Committee, and then it may end with the money committees. And so you may be targeting a series of different public officials rather than the one that you are a constituent of. Communicating with policymakers. As I mentioned, we're a nonprofit, so we have to be positive and nonpartisan, but that comes with pros and cons in your arena too. If you're able to work with both sides, you'll have an even larger impact because it will be bipartisan. Be personal. So it's always good to connect your communications to a personal story. And you can do this through a video. You can do this through thinking of kind of a hashtag campaign. So connecting with your other friends and thinking of a key message. We've in the past done I am trauma informed VA and collected several stories, and people are able to follow that hashtag and click on it to see others. Be persistent and patient. Um, Things do not happen overnight. Always stay on the message. So whenever you're posting something, you don't want your message to be all over the place, but instead very consistent. Never give inaccurate information. So if you do happen to get a response and you don't know the answer, the good news is you can always come back to it and relax. Legislators are just everyday people like us. So here are some tips on communicating with your policymaker. One, you want to be clear about your position. I support, I oppose. And this kind of helps get to the point. Often with social media, people have to figure out what you're trying to do. They may just move on to the next status. Or even through email communications, for example, if you've ever received a long email and you're kind of like, where is this going? Uh, Personalize the issue by telling that story. And remember, the three keys to successful storytelling is keeping it short, as hard as it might be, tying it to the solution, and then tying it to the call to ask. For your legislator that you are a constituent of, or if you're targeting a legislator that's out of your domain, the good news is perhaps think of other people that is in that locality, so that you can get their support, so that their legislator will be more likely interested in what you're trying to propose. So make the issue local and relevant to them. They just have more of an incentive to listen. Talk about what's happening in their district. If you, for example, have a program or an office within their district, you can also invite them on the off season. And then lastly, stay on topic by keeping the communication strategically tied to that message and call to ask. Don't get so caught up in the back and forth that you forget that call to ask. It's the most important. Choosing your platform. So this is last year's data, but when choosing your platform, you have to think of the right platform for you. So I've organized this is data from the Pew Research Center, and you can see which platforms have the most followers, the ones that perhaps are the least popular. There's also a new platform that I want to flag with you, that I just found out about recently, which is Clubhouse. If you've used Clubhouse, you can click in the chat what you think about Clubhouse, but you have to have an iPhone for that or some sort of Mac, Apple product, or it's kind of like a different form of LinkedIn where you can host chats like this and connect with folks that you are interested in your field. But for the platforms on here, the ones that I mostly used is Facebook. YouTube is a little harder to grow your follower, but the more events you host on YouTube, for example, you can host YouTube Live or pre-record something and use a live stream app that will grow your followers on YouTube. Messenger is, of course, popular on Facebook, even if you have a professional page and folks have the option to message you. Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat is typically a younger audience. And then LinkedIn, of course, we know is good for blogs and for professional events like this to post. So most popular, I would say, is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter overall for organizations to use. There are also online petitions and rallies. One example is the Get Up campaign, which was digital campaign. Its partners, it occurred in Australia, and its partners prevented the Australian government from deporting more than 200 asylum seekers through online petitions and street protests. Another example of a digitally empowered social movement is Black Lives Matter. It uses the internet and mobilizes technology to engage thousands, both online and in the streets. There's the Won't Buy Unilever campaign, which was an example of a poisonous product that people spoke out against through a viral rap video, which is following this. There's also Move On, which was a campaign that's been active since 1998, and Get Up since 2005. They both have permanent professional staff, just like their traditional counterparts, but they differ in different ways. The key patterns we see here are that these campaigns are nimble, they're multi-issue, they're collaborative, and they have the ability to be both reactive but preventative and responsive. So what was the Unilever campaign? It was a consumer awareness campaign, reached more than 500,000 individuals on Twitter. The CEO had ultimately ended with a response on Twitter as well. On March 9th of last year, Unilever declared it would compensate poison workers in and out of a court settlement for an undisclosed amount, thought to be in the tens of millions of dollars. So you see how it started off on Twitter, but ended in the courtroom in a very powerful settlement. I'm gonna see, I may have to stop my screen share for a second just to share the audio affiliated with this video. So let's try this out. Okay, share sound. Okay, and we'll see if this plays. This is an example of Unilever.
Kodaikanal won't, Kodaikanal won't, Kodaikanal won't step down till you make amends now. This is the story of Kodai's frustration, known to us as the princess of hill stations. Unilever came and left devastation as they exposed the land to contamination. So here's the story. They set up a thermometer factory where workers handle toxic mercury. They dump their waste in the local shrubbery. Now that's some toxic shit. By the way, what they say, that the factory was safe as day. They don't trust a word of what the workers say. What about the polluting, the mercury poisoning? It's life-threatening, there's kids suffering. Poison in the soil, you don't have a spoil. Your cleanup was a sham, there's poison in the air. You ain't done. Kodaikanal won't, Kodaikanal won't, Kodaikanal won't step down till you make amends now. Unilever, clean up your mess. Unilever, clean up your mess. Unilever, I said clean up your mess. Clean up your mess, that's right, clean up your mess. Unilever has...
Okay, I'll just share a little bit of that. So that's kind of an example. They used music, they did some community mobilization, it was kind of catchy, and that ultimately caught the attention of others. So you could use similar tactics or different. We also have our Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign, which launched in August, but was fully digital with over 30 events. I'll put the website in the chat, which you can click on. It essentially launched with Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week with statewide geographic buy-in, over 30 digital events, and we grew our social media platform to over 800 in just a week's span. So sometimes you can use the power of events and community buy-in, and now it's a long-term campaign, which brings you here today. But a review of some social media platforms, Twitter, for those that may not be fully hip, has 280 characters in a tweet. It's a good way to practice kind of strategically getting your message out in a really short and straightforward and transparent way. Also, example of the power of Twitter is much of the policy debate is shaped by what the president tweets. So we see how powerful Twitter as a platform can be through our president. Politicians are also more likely to be active on Twitter. The key there is because it's the real time. But in relation to time, one thing to note with Twitter is that it's not consecutive in time like the other platforms. You could post something yesterday that someone may get a notification of today. So it really doesn't matter what time you post on Twitter. Although legislators do use it as an opportunity to give their constituents updates while they're in a meeting in real time. You can also do Twitter storms, which is when you get other people to engage in a conversation at the same time as you on Twitter, and that's a way to get your visibility up on the platform. Again, this is data from the Pew Research Center on when exploring target demographics on Twitter. Twitter is most popular with people in their 20s. The breakdown of Twitter user and demographics is as follows: 32% 13 to 17 years old, 40% 18 to 29, 27% 30 to 49, 19% 50 to 64, and only 8% of individuals 65 and up use Twitter. Surprisingly, it's pretty even for women and men as far as gender use. And then 79% of Twitter's user base actually resides outside of the US, which is pretty interesting. Oh, okay, it looks like I'm on presenter mode still. Let me try to figure this out. Okay. Stop screen share for a second. Oops. Unfortunately, it's hard to click on things when you're on screen share too. Okay, and let me go back to full screen. How's that look? Okay, hopefully it's in the right mode now. Thank you. Okay, let's go a little back. So this is one Twitter example. Delegate Jeff Bourne, interacting him. That is his Twitter page, and you see some responses from Delegate Sia Price through the thread. Someone retweeted it. So it's just kind of an example of how individuals engage on Twitter. And typically you can go to your public officials. Most of them have websites where you can find out what their Twitter handles are to engage with them. I also see he shared a powerful speech about gun violence. So you cannot necessarily upload a video on Twitter, but if you upload the video to YouTube, get the YouTube link, then you can share that on Twitter without an upload, unless the video is shorter than a certain amount of seconds. It limits it to the time. So for Facebook, it's good for live videos, text, post, images, and stories. The content is ultimately, when you're engaging on Facebook, your goal should be to engage in conversation between your followers and audience, meaningful interactions between people. And so here's a Facebook example from no longer in office with Delegate Peace, where he's sharing information via Facebook. You also may find one cool thing about Facebook is you can do Facebook events. It's also free marketing. You don't have to pay for marketing. How many times have you all seen a Facebook event just pop up on your feed? And then you can also, even on Zoom, integrate with Facebook Live as well as YouTube. So it's a way to get your followers up on both platforms, depending upon which platform. You only can use one at a time for that. For Instagram, there's also stories, photos, videos. You can also do live videos, and they are limited. But if you have a longer video, some people even have shows on YouTube because of IGTV. So it's typically a younger demographic, but you are able to engage in similar concepts. It's a little limited when it comes to text. It just looks awkward when you see a 2 paragraphs on Instagram under a photo. So you really have to think strategically on how you want to use the platform. So when thinking of target demographics for Instagram, it's a much younger audience than Facebook. 72% 13 to 17, 64% 18 to 19, 40% 30 to 49, 20% 50 to 64, and then 10% 65 and up. It's also more popular amongst women than men. So when you're targeting your demographic, you want to think of who's going to see this and is that my target audience? I think I may have skipped Facebook. Let me make sure I didn't skip the demographic. No, that's Twitter. It may be later on, or maybe I didn't include it in this video. Yeah. So there's Senator McClellan's Instagram, and has a certain amount of followers. Now, of course, the more followers you have, the more people who are going to see your content. And if you happen to have a special page that you can link, if you're promoting something, you can link it in your bio and switch out that link so that, because people aren't going to take the time to copy and paste it. Instagram is really a cellular platform rather than a web platform. And then this is Snapchat. There's like special shows on Snapchat. It is leaning toward a younger demographic and really just known for stories and chats. Instagram and other platforms have also adopted Snapchat's tactics such as the story. So now you see a similar offer on other platforms, but it first began with Snapchat. So 69% 13 to 17 years old, 68% 18 to 29, 26% 30 to 49, 10% 50 to 64, and only 3% 65 and up. More women than men also use this platform, and it's intended to post throughout the day. So people are like following your day through your stories. It's not something that we've necessarily used for business use yet. But perhaps if the platform grows a bit, then it can transform more to business. But at this point, every platform offers stories and chats. So, but the shows are really cool. LinkedIn, which many who are professional may know about, you can even apply for a job on LinkedIn. And people can pull your resume from LinkedIn. It's a professional social media site where you can share content, network, build your personal brand. The followers also mean a bit more on LinkedIn since there's a bit more intentionality behind it. And it's ultimately where individuals can establish their company's brand. For example, if you look at Voices, you can see our teammates on LinkedIn, and you can also use it to identify and attract talent. There is Clubhouse now, which I encourage you all to look into, which is also a professional platform. What's different about Clubhouse is it's referral based. So you kind of have to know someone to be a part of the club in Clubhouse. But that's been increasingly more popular recently. I just found out about it about 2 weeks ago and am starting to build my brand and followers there. So looking at LinkedIn, 29% 18 to 29, 33% 30 to 49, 24% 50 to 64, and 9% 65 and up. amongst men and women, it's pretty equal, and 70% of LinkedIn's member actually reside out of the US. So then there's YouTube, which is also owned by Google. It's a video sharing platform. Besides being one of the biggest social media sites, YouTube is also known to be a large search engine right after Google. Companies can create a channel for their brand. You all can also create a channel for your brand, your personal brands. You can upload videos, and the goal is to grow subscribers. If you make a certain amount of subscribers, you can even start boosting it with ads and make some revenue off of YouTube. A lot of people have become famous from videos on YouTube that went viral. And so uh, it's a pretty impactful platform that way. During Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, we also did YouTube and Facebook live streaming in order to grow our followers. So now that you know a bit about the platforms, how can you implement those strategies? So ultimately, you want to inspire people through your communications, make it memorable. How many times have you all seen a YouTube video or Facebook or whatever that went viral? It's often because it was memorable. Keep the goal succinct. What do you want to get out of the communications? You can use visuals, make sure you're branding things with logos if you're representing a company, branded colors. You can also connect it to the call to action by saying submit or contact or giving people a link to be strategic that way. Spread your reach uh, using social sharing buttons, allowing people to share your content with other networks, matching tools to connect folks to supporters. Um, or you can also add, if you have a certain number of partners that support your initiative, or friends, tagging them so that it shows up on their page as well. We also use action alerts, especially during session, which CQ Engage is an example of a tool to use that you'd need to invest in for action alerts, or Vote Your Voice, which is what we currently use now. But it immediately connects folks to the target committee legislators' emails. And so we're able to connect it to the call to action that way. People can copy and paste the message that we're trying to share, or just add on their personal story to it. Pros and cons to that: legislators know you're using an action alert tool. But it can also let them know, well, hey, I've gotten a lot of action alerts on this topic, so let me look into it a bit more. And then the implementation part, choosing your platforms and implementing your campaign goal, communications goal. Ultimately, themes with successful campaigns is that they maintain buy-in, they're responsive, they're multi-issue, so they resonate with a lot of people, and then they digitally mobilize, which means that they're growing. People are invested, the outreach is working, they're nimble and reactive. The core tool they use is centered around mobilizing people through those online strategies. Within hours, they can set up another campaign, have members to contact, build a new website, and influence decision makers. When I say multi-issue, they're first built up with their supporter bases by focusing on one area, but then they expand it into a broader issue so that it resonates with even more people. They ultimately are leaned in on because of their political expertise. And then they're collaborative. They don't work alone. They're what I call leaderful. So instead of having one leader in the room, you have several that are being leaderful, and they're also able to combat those that do not support their mission or goal through an alternative framework. So you always want to develop the goal, the strategy, be leaderful, create buy-in, develop a list of tools. I've also done social media toolkits where you don't necessarily need to invest in uh, technology to do it. You just kind of take the time to pre-draft some tweets on some statuses, and that way people can go to your website, copy and paste, and then they've already got it without investing the time. They can spread your message. Develop an implementation plan. You may want to do a social media calendar where you can simply use an Excel spreadsheet or a Microsoft document and think, what am I going to post this week and next week and the following week? And then you can kind of see the trends in messaging or really be strategic that way. And then mobilize support, get your friends, get your colleagues to also post so that you can be visible a bit more. And so we have a digital advocacy training, though that's today. I meant to say our digital advocacy day is January 25th. So you can visit our website, vakids.org, and visit under Join Us, click events to participate in our digital advocacy day. I have a worksheet that you can kind of think through where you can develop your story. You can choose which platform you want to participate in as an advocate, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or email, the platform that's right for you. There's opportunities to share your stories. You can click whether it can be shared through a blog platform or perhaps an op-ed if the opportunity arises, and more. So if you click the Digital Advocacy Day at vakids.org, or you can go to the, thank you, the Racial Truth events page. You'll also see all our events there. And you can also see the worksheet for the Digital Advocacy Day there too. And that also gives us the opportunity to automatically, another technique that you can use, you automatically have your story bank, you have your advocates and signed on for that support. And then you've got your stories ready to go if you happen to get some press coverage. Coming up is also the January 13th Justice Advocacy Training, which will be on Facebook and YouTube. I'll give you all some insight on this. It is pre-recorded, so I'm only giving you all insight since this is a digital advocacy training, but it's pre-recorded and we're using a live stream tool in order to air it on Facebook and YouTube. And one cool thing about that tool is because whenever you go on Facebook Live, it notifies all of your followers that you're on Facebook Live, so you're able to grow your reach that way. On the 18th, we're connecting with Brown, Virginia for our Dr. King Day of Action. We're serving as a partner. Brown, Virginia is a network convener of all justice-oriented organizations across the state. And so they have a really exciting itinerary for you all. Some legislators as special guests, folks from the governor's administration will also be present. And one neat thing about this is that the partners that we're connecting with exceed our areas of expertise. So if you're interested in some criminal justice, juvenile justice, school to prison pipeline work, you can join that day. Later on that day, we also have so Brown, Virginia is from 9 to 1, and then from 3 to 5, we have our Racial Truth and Reconciliation, Historical Perspectives, Reckoning the Past and Reconciling the Present event in honor of Dr. King. This event will be with all of our art and educational entities across the state. For those who may not be familiar with my work, I also incorporate some art activism into what I do here at Voices. And so this year, we have a special cohort of youth, caregivers, and art activists. What to expect. The goal of the event is really to encourage others to pursue their own journey of racial truth and reconciliation. So we'll kind of start it off with some background. Our art activists will perform through a virtual showcase, and then we'll end with a panel where VMFA, the Valentine Initiatives of Change, the Civil War Museum, and the Library of they'll talk about their Virginia Untold program, which looks at court documents from slaves. So a little bit of a mix there. And we have our Facebook event for that too. It'll be on Facebook Live. So you'll get to watch it at Racial Truth. So lots of opportunities coming up. If you haven't visited our Racial Truth page, I encourage you to do so. Brown Virginia event will be recorded. That's a great question. I know they're using Hopin. I'm not sure if you can record on Hopin, but it will be on Facebook Live as well, I believe. So you should be able to visit their Brown Virginia page and see it on Facebook later on that day. And they're going into breakout rooms and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if a recording would work for that event. I'll double check with Jewel. If you would like advocacy tools, you can visit our advocacy tools page. If you'd like advocacy opportunities to take action, we'll be updating our action page throughout the GA session. We're also doing equity impact statements this year for each of our issue areas, which will be launching this week. You can find our legislative agendas on Voices 2 this week. We do have videos on YouTube that we'll be posting on social media or that you can view there. And then again, I encourage you to fill out that advocacy worksheet and join our listservs. We'll be emailing action alerts through each of our listservs. So you'll have the opportunity to advocate through email using those. Okay. And here's our contact information, my contact information. And for our social media, it's Racial Truth on all platforms to follow us. Now I'll take any questions that folks may have. But thank you for listening in.
I have a question. Are there any bills this session that you guys are following particularly closely?